The light in the high conclave of the Xylos consortium was not born of fusion or fission, but of resonance. It was a visible hum, a crystalline music that refracted through the very air, casting long, geometric shadows from the attendants who stood like statues of polished obsidian. At the chamber's heart, suspended in a slow, gravitic eddy, was the locus, a perfect, multifaceted sphere of solidified thought that pulsed with the collective anxieties of an empire. Inside its silent, shimmering depths, a single image was held, a void of space, featureless save for the distant, indifferent glitter of unsanctioned stars. It was a patch of emptiness that screamed with a volume no sound could ever achieve, for it was where the alien vessel had been, and where it now was not. High Counselor Lyra, her form a delicate lattice of silicates and bioluminescent nerve clusters, felt the chamber's resonance shift with the disquiet of her peers. Her own thoughts, usually as clear and ordered as the crystalline structures of her body, were clouded with an unfamiliar haze of uncertainty. For generations beyond counting, the consortium had been the sole arbiters of this spiral arm. Their technology, inherited from progenitors whose names were now myth, was the final word on reality. Their gravitic drives did not brute force the fabric of spacetime, they persuaded it. Their communications did not shout across the void, they whispered through its foundational symmetries. They were a civilization of sublime maintenance, of perfect, unchanging order, and that order had been fractured. The logs from the Cathar patrol remain unchanged. A voice, tonally pure and sharp as cut glass, emanated from a counselor to her left. The intruder vessel designated human crossed the demarcation line without broadcast or query. It ignored standard hails. As per protocol, the Cathar vessel * Iron Talon executed a dissuasion volley. The intent was not destruction, but disablement. A message, written in the universal language of superior force. Lyra's gaze shifted to the other side of the chamber, where Lord Marshal Vorlag of the Cathar stood, his immense, carapaced form a stark contrast to the elegant fragility of the Xylos. Cathar were the consortium's sword and shield, a species bound by honor and battle, their biology a symphony of hardened chitin and redundant organ systems. Vorlag's mandibles clicked softly, a sound of restrained impatience. His people did not debate, they acted. The volley performed as designed. Vorlag's voice was a low rumble like tectonic plates grinding deep beneath a world's crust. Their primary drive system was ionized. Their maneuvering thrusters were fused. The vessel was rendered inert. A textbook interdiction. My warriors reported the human ship venting atmosphere, its energy signature collapsing. They were adrift, crippled. We were preparing a boarding party to render aid and secure the vessel for study. He paused, and the weight of that pause filled the chamber. And then it was gone. The image in the locus shimmered. It showed the last moments of the recording. The human ship, a brutalist shard of gray metal, scarred and smoking, tumbling slowly in the void. And then in the space between one frame of recorded light and the next, it simply ceased to be. There was no flash of a drive engaging, no ripple of spatial distortion, no burst of energy that would signify self-destruction. It did not depart. It vanished, as if it had never been there at all. An illusion, a stealth system of unknown configuration. Another Xylos counselor posited, its internal light flickering with doubt. Impossible, Vorlag rumbled, his contempt for such speculation barely concealed. Our sensors peel back the layers of reality. We see the flow of time, the echo of causality. Nothing can hide from us. The vessel and its crew, its mass and its energy were present, and then they were not. It is a violation of physics as we understand it. And that, Lyra knew, was the heart of the fear that now resonated through the conclave. It was not the intrusion that frightened them. It was not the silent defiance of the humans. It was the impossibility of their disappearance. For a civilization that had mastered the laws of the universe, the appearance of a miracle was an act of profound terror. It suggested their understanding was incomplete, their mastery an illusion. We have studied what little we know of these humans, Lyra projected, her own voice a calming, harmonic chord designed to soothe the agitated frequencies of the chamber. Their broadcasts are a cacophony of chaotic emotion. They wage war upon themselves with primitive, kinetic weapons. Their biology is fragile, a chaotic soup of liquids and soft tissues, utterly dependent on a narrow band of environmental conditions. They are ephemeral, their individual lifespans barely a flicker against our own. How could such a species possess a technology that supersedes our own understanding? Perhaps their chaos is not a weakness but a strength, Vorlag countered, the thought seeming to cause him physical discomfort. The Cathar honor discipline. The Xylos revere logic. We build upon the solid foundations of what is known. These humans, they seem to thrive in the unknown. They throw themselves at it, again and again, like waves against a cliff. Perhaps in their endless, frantic scrabbling, one of them found a crack in the edifice of reality that we, in our certainty, never thought to look for. Silence descended again, thick and heavy. The conclave contemplated the Lord Marshal's words. It was a deeply unsettling philosophy. The idea that progress could come not from meticulous, logical deduction, but from random, frantic trial and error, was anathema to the Xylos' way of existence. They did not discover. They uncovered the truths that were already elegantly laid out in the universe's design. They were curators of cosmic law, not scrappy inventors. For cycles, the consortium had watched the burgeoning human sphere of influence with a distant, almost paternalistic curiosity. They were a noisy, boisterous species, expanding with a reckless energy that the consortium found both pitiable and faintly alarming. They were considered a regional curiosity, a species to be contained and observed until they either destroyed themselves or matured into a more predictable form of life. The dissuasion volley fired by the asterisk Iron Talon was meant to be the first lesson in that education, a clear demonstration of the established hierarchy of the galaxy. You are new here, you are loud, and you are trespassing. But the student had not only refused the lesson, they had answered with an impossible riddle. And in the long, silent weeks that followed, the riddle had festered. Patrols along the demarcation line were tripled. Deep-range sensor arrays were focused on the human territories, searching for any sign of the vanished ship, any hint of mobilization, any whisper of retaliation. Nothing. The silence from the humans was more unnerving than any threat. A primitive, emotional species, as their data suggested, should have reacted with fury, with a declaration of war, however futile, with a desperate plea for mercy. But they had offered only silence, a profound, absolute silence that spoke of a depth and a patience the consortium had not anticipated. It was the silence of something that was thinking, something that was learning. Lyra felt a tremor run through her crystalline form, a resonance of pure, unadulterated dread. They had swatted at a wasp's nest, but what had emerged was not a swarm, it was a ghost. A ghost that had defied the very laws of existence, and now, somewhere in the darkness, it was watching them. The tension in the high conclave did not ebb in the cycles that followed. It solidified, becoming a permanent feature of the chamber's resonance. The image in the locus remained fixed on that empty patch of space, a constant, silent accusation. The Xylos debated, their logical processes running in endless, fruitless loops, trying to formulate a theory that could account for the vanishing without shattering their understanding of the cosmos. The Cathar, meanwhile, grew restless. Their fleets patrolled the border, their honor demanding a resolution. An enemy who would not fight was an enemy that could not be defeated, a concept that grated against the very core of their warrior ethos. Lord Marshal Vorlag spent more and more time in the conclave, his massive form a looming shadow of impatience, his presence a constant reminder of the action that had precipitated this crisis of faith. Lyra found her own thoughts drifting back through the ages to the vast, silent archives of Xylos' history. Their civilization had not grown, it had been unveiled. Their great technological leaps had not been moments of invention, but of rediscovery, of deciphering the artifacts left by the progenitors. The gravitic drive, the resonant communications, the very crystalline architecture of their cities, all of it was inherited. They were stewards of a legacy they no longer fully comprehended. They knew how to operate the machinery of the cosmos, but they had long forgotten how to build it. And she feared they had forgotten how to innovate beyond it. This single, silent human ship had, in its impossible disappearance, revealed the consortium not as masters of the universe, but as complacent children playing with tools of immense power and limited understanding. The silence was finally broken not by the roar of a human war fleet, but by a whisper. It came not through the standard communication channels, but as a subtle modulation in the cosmic background radiation, a pattern so elegant and so deeply embedded in the fabric of spacetime that it took the consortium's most sensitive arrays days to isolate and decode it. It was not a message of anger or threat. It was a sequence of pure mathematics, beginning with prime numbers and building with breathtaking grace into a complex proof that described the multidimensional topology of their own gravitic drives. It was a feat of theoretical physics that the Xylos themselves had not achieved in 10,000 years. The message concluded not with a demand or an ultimatum, but with a simple, polite invitation. A set of coordinates, located in neutral space, and a time signature. They were being invited to a conversation. The audacity of it sent a fresh wave of discordant resonance through the conclave. These creatures who had been fired upon and crippled were not responding with rage, but with a display of intellectual superiority that was as humbling as it was terrifying. They had taken the energy signature of the Cathar's weapon, a tool of force, and reverse-engineered the profound universal principles behind it. They had looked at the sword pointed at their throat, and instead of fearing the edge, had admired the metallurgy. "It is a trap," Vorlag rumbled, his mandibles clacking in agitation. "They mean to lure our leadership into an ambush, to show us this parlor trick of mathematics and then annihilate us. It is a dishonorable strategy, but perhaps one to be expected from a species that hides instead of fights." "Or," Lyra countered, her own internal light glowing with a strange, hesitant luminescence, "it is exactly what it appears to be, an invitation, an attempt at communication. They have had weeks to attack us if that was their intent. They could have used this impossible vanishing technology to strike at our core worlds without warning, but they did not. They waited, they learned, and now they wish to speak. To ignore this gesture, to meet it with suspicion and force, would be an act of profound ignorance on our part." The debate was long and fraught with the accumulated fear of the preceding cycles. The Cathar argued for a battle fleet to be sent to the coordinates to meet this human gesture with overwhelming strength. The Xylos, ever cautious, argued for sending an automated drone, but Lyra, in a move that surprised even herself, argued for something more. She argued for diplomacy. She argued that the greatest danger was not a human attack, but their own continued ignorance. The universe, it seemed, was larger and stranger than their inherited knowledge had led them to believe, and these soft-bodied, short-lived humans were the first beings in millennia to offer them a glimpse of a new page. In the end, a compromise was reached. A single, heavily escorted diplomatic vessel would be sent. Lord Marshal Vorlag would command the escort fleet, which would remain at the edge of the system, a silent deterrent. Lyra herself would lead the diplomatic party. She needed to see these creatures, to feel their resonance, to look into whatever passed for their eyes and understand the nature of a mind that could turn an act of aggression into a lesson in theoretical physics. As her ship, the asterisk stasis of harmony asterisk, translated from the smooth currents of gravitic travel into the harsh reality of normal space, the designated coordinates came into view. The system was unremarkable, a dim orange star, a few lifeless balls of rock and frozen gas. And waiting in the void, a single human vessel. It was not the scarred, brutalist ship from the Cathar patrol logs. This one was sleek, almost elegant, its hull a burnished white that seemed to drink the dim starlight. It was unarmed. Sensor scans confirmed no energy signatures consistent with weapon systems, no launch tubes, no shielded hardpoints. It floated in the silence of its own volition, a statement of peaceful intent so absolute it was almost aggressive. "They are hailing us," the ship's subcortex announced. "Broadcasting on all frequencies. They are using our own resonant protocols. The transmission is flawless." Lyra felt another tremor of disbelief. To master their communication methods, which were intertwined with the subtleties of their crystalline consciousness, was a task that took other species centuries. The humans had apparently learned it in a matter of weeks. On the main viewing crystal before her, the channel opened. A figure appeared. It was a human, a female according to their biological intelligence files. Her form was soft, her skin pale, her head adorned with a mane of dark, fine filaments. She was encased in a simple, dark blue uniform, but it was her eyes that held Lyra's attention. They were dark, liquid pools of profound and unnerving calm. There was no fear in them, no anger, only a quiet, unwavering intelligence. "I am Ambassador Eva Rostova," the human said, her voice translating into the pure, resonant tones of the Xylos language. The translation was perfect, carrying not just the meaning of the words, but their emotional weight, their subtle intent. "On behalf of the Terran Confederacy, I welcome you, High Counselor Lyra. We thank you for coming." Lyra paused, her mind struggling to proc. It's the sheer incongruity of the moment. "You thank us," she projected, the question laced with a confusion that was difficult to conceal. "We fired upon your vessel, we crippled it." The human, Rostova, offered a slight inclination of her head, a gesture their files identified as one of acknowledgement or respect. "The actions of your patrol vessel were unexpected," she said, her choice of words a masterpiece of diplomatic understatement. "But they were not, in the final analysis, without benefit. You have given us a gift, High Counselor, a gift of perspective. We came to your space as explorers. You have unintentionally turned us into something more." The chamber on the human ship was an exercise in minimalist design that felt both alien and strangely familiar to Lyra. The air was recycled with a low hum, a crude but effective imitation of the living resonance of a Xylos environment. The lighting was soft, indirect, and designed to approximate the light of their home star, a gesture of consideration so thoughtful it was unsettling. Ambassador Eva Rostova sat opposite her at a simple, polished table, unadorned and functional. Lord Marshal Vorlag stood behind Lyra, a silent, monolithic mountain of chitin and suspicion, his very presence a violation of the room's intended serenity. He had insisted on joining the diplomatic party, his honor demanding he face those he had wronged or those who sought to deceive him. "Your vessel, the Odyssey *," Lyra began, her voice a carefully modulated series of harmonic tones. "It was critically damaged, its life support was failing, and yet it vanished from our sensors, an event our physics cannot explain. We presumed it destroyed." Rostova's expression remained placid, her calm a stark contrast to the consortium's weeks of escalating panic. "The Odyssey was not destroyed," she stated simply. "It was relocated. The dissuasion volley from your patrol ship did indeed cripple our primary systems. Our FTL drive was shattered. Our conventional thrusters were useless. We were, as you surmised, stranded." She paused, letting the words settle in the quiet room. "We were adrift in your space, our vessel bleeding its life into the void. According to your threat assessments of my species, we should have panicked. We should have turned on one another. We should have broadcast desperate pleas for help. A logical assumption based on the chaotic nature of your species' public transmissions," Lyra conceded. "Our public transmissions are a small and often misleading fraction of our reality," Rostova replied, a faint, unreadable expression touching her lips. "Panic is a luxury we discarded long ago. What we did was what humanity has always done when faced with an unsolvable problem. We got to work." She gestured to a nearby wall which dissolved to reveal a star chart not of celestial bodies but of pure energy schematics flowing and shifting in 3 dimensions. "Your weapon did not just damage us. It left an energy signature, a residue on the hull of the Odyssey at a quantum level. We began to analyze it." Vorlag shifted his weight, a low growl rumbling in his chest. "You studied our weaponry?" "We studied the principles behind it," Rostova corrected him gently. "We recognized it immediately. Gravitic manipulation, the direct, controlled warping of local spacetime. It is a technology we have theorized about for centuries but never achieved. Our own FTL travel is a brute force method by comparison. We punch holes in reality and jump through them. It is effective but inelegant. Unsafe even. What we saw in the residue of your weapon was art, a science so advanced it had become indistinguishable from nature." Lyra felt a strange sensation, a resonance that was part pride and part shame. The technology was theirs, a gift of the progenitors, but these humans were speaking of it with a reverence and understanding that the Xylos themselves had long since lost. "But we also saw that it was incomplete," Rostova continued, her dark eyes fixed on Lyra's. "It was like finding a perfect, intricate gear, but with no knowledge of the grand machine it was meant to turn. The principles were sound, but the application was limited. You use it to propel your ships, to maintain artificial gravity, and to project kinetic force. Powerful applications, certainly, but you are using a key that can unlock the universe to merely open a door." Vorlag took a step forward, his shadow falling over the table. "You dare to lecture us on our own technology." "The technology of the progenitors." Rostova did not flinch. Her gaze met the Lord Marshal's without fear. "We do not lecture, we observe, and we learn. Trapped aboard the Odyssey with our imminent deaths a statistical certainty, our engineers and physicists began to extrapolate. They worked back from the effect to the cause. They rebuilt the equations from first principles, and they found what you had either lost or had never discovered: the mast. Our equations, the unified theory that governs the technology you wield." The air in the room grew cold. Lyra's internal light dimmed. The master equations were the holy grail of Xylos science, a theoretical framework spoken of only in whispers, a myth from the time of the progenitors. To even suggest they had been solved by a crew of stranded primitives on a dying ship, it was the height of arrogance. And yet the calm certainty in Rostova's voice was undeniable. "And once we had the theory," the ambassador said, her voice dropping slightly, "we needed a way to test it. We needed a power source. Our ship's reactor was failing, but we had one other source of immense untapped energy, our FTL drive, the singularity at its core." Her eyes shifted for a moment to the schematic. "Our engineers devised a way to collapse the singularity, not in a chaotic explosion, but in a controlled, directed implosion. For a single nanosecond, the Odyssey became a focal point, a brief, surgically precise tear in the fabric of spacetime. It did not move through space. It simply moved space around it. To your sensors, it would appear as if we had vanished. In reality, we had just taken our first clumsy step into a much larger world." Lyra could not form a response. The entire High Conclave, the most advanced minds in the consortium, had been paralyzed by a mystery that these humans had solved and weaponized into a new form of travel in a matter of days as a desperate act of survival. "That was weeks ago," Lyra finally managed, her voice a thin, fragile chord. "What have you been doing since?" "Perfecting it," Rostova answered. "And building." She turned to the wall that was once a star chart. It now showed a live visual feed. It was a view of deep space, black and empty. When we returned to our own territory, we did not broadcast our discovery. We did not call for war or for revenge. We understood that what happened was a misunderstanding, born of your caution and our ignorance, an unfortunate but ultimately illuminating first contact. Instead, we presented our findings to our unified government, and we were given a new directive. A flicker of movement on the view screen. Then another. Something was emerging from the darkness. At first, they were just points of light, too numerous to be stars. Then, as the perspective shifted, their scale became terrifyingly apparent. They were ships, but a kind of ship that defied all consortium design philosophy. They were not sleek predators like the Cathar warships, nor crystalline palaces like the Xylos vessels. They were colossal, city-sized structures, geodesic spheres and vast, spinning rings, all glowing with a soft, internal light. Within the transparent domes, Lyra could see oceans, forests, mountain ranges. They were worlds unto themselves, an entire civilization on the move, and they were not moving with the crude flash of fusion drives or the subtle ripple of the consortium's gravitic engines. They moved with a silent, effortless grace, as if the universe itself was bending to their will. A sky that had been empty moments before was now filled with them, a new constellation of impossible machines, blotting out the stars behind them. It was not a fleet, it was a migration. Vorlag made a choked sound, a grating of chitin that spoke of pure primal shock. Even he who had witnessed the fury of dying stars and the birth of black holes had never seen such a thing. The sheer scale, the sheer audacity of it was beyond comprehension. This was not a fleet built for war. A war fleet is built for speed and destructive power. These were built to endure, to last for eternity. You did this. Lyra whispered, her voice barely a resonant hum. You built all of this in a few weeks? We did not build them from scratch, Rostova explained, her voice as calm as if she were describing a weather pattern. These are our seed ships, a project humanity has been working on for over a century in secret. We have always known that our homeworld would not last forever, that our star would one day die. We were building arcs, lifeboats to carry our species to new galaxies, but they were slow. Inefficient, it would have taken them millennia to reach even the closest galactic neighbor. They were a project born of hope, but burdened by the limitations of our understanding. She turned her gaze back to them, and for the first time, Lyra saw a flicker of something profound in her eyes, not pity, not pride, but a deep, sorrowful gravity. Your technology gave us the final piece we were missing, Rostova said, the perfected gravitic drive. A way to move these worlds not at the speed of light, but at the speed of thought. You gave us the ability to turn our desperate hope into a reality. We retrofitted the entire Arc fleet with the new drives, built upon the principles we learned from the *Iron Talon *S dissuasion volley. What you are seeing is the culmination of our history, powered by your legacy. The truth settled upon Lyra with the weight of a dying sun. The title of the human media story, if they ever created one, would be galling in its simplicity. They damaged our ship, so we used their technology to build a super fleet. But the reality was so much more complex, so much more humbling. Humanity had not stolen their fire. They had been handed a single ember, and from it they had ignited a sun. The consortium, in its arrogance, had tried to teach a primitive species a lesson in power, and in doing so, had inadvertently given them the keys to the cosmos. Vorlag was silent, his warrior's pride shattered. He had fired a single shot to disable a lone scout, and in response, the human species had quietly, calmly, and logically leapfrogged his entire civilization. Grandest fleet the Cathar had ever assembled, a sea of obsidian warships that had pacified 1,000 systems, would be nothing against this. Not because the human arcs were weapons, but because their existence operated on a level of science and engineering that made conventional warfare utterly obsolete. How do you fight a species that can move worlds as easily as you move a ship? How do you threaten a people whose technological advancement accelerates at a rate you can no longer even measure? Why? Vorlag's voice was a ragged rasp, the first word he had spoken since the fleet was revealed. Why show us this? You hold power over us now, power absolute. You could erase our civilization from existence and we could do nothing to stop you. Why invite us here? Why speak to us at all? It was the question that had been screaming in the silent corners of Lyra's own mind. The display of power was absolute. The logical next step for any species the consortium had ever encountered would be subjugation. Demands for tribute, for territory, for fealty. Ambassador Rostova turned her full attention to the hulking Cathar warrior. Her expression softened, and the deep, abiding calm in her eyes was now tinged with something else. It was not pity, it was empathy. Because we did not undertake this project merely to save ourselves, Lord Marshal, she said, her voice carrying a new weight, a profound solemnity that resonated deep within Lyra's crystalline structure. This fleet, these arcs, they are not a means of escape. They are a method of preservation, and we have reason to believe that we are not the only ones who will need it. Rostova gestured again to the display wall. The image of the majestic arc fleet dissolved, replaced by something else. It was a waveform, impossibly ancient and faint, a ghost of a signal buried deep within the cosmic microwave background radiation, the echo of the universe's creation. It was a pattern of such subtlety that the consortium's own sensors had always dismissed it as random noise. The Asterisk Odyssey's original mission was not simple exploration, Rostova explained. It was sent to investigate this signal. We have been studying it for decades. It is not natural. It is a message. Or more accurately, a warning and a lament. She touched a control on the table, and the waveform was translated into sound. Not the resonant tones of the xylos or the guttural language of the Cathar, but a series of mournful, cascading harmonies that seemed to convey a sense of loss so immense, so galactic in scale, that it transcended language. It was the sound of 1,000,000,000,000 voices crying out and then abruptly falling silent. The message is fragmented, eroded by billions of years of cosmic expansion, Rostova said, her own voice a quiet counterpoint to the ghost song. But what we have been able to piece together is a story, a cycle. The signal speaks of a phenomenon it calls the Great Silence. It is not a weapon, not an enemy. It is a fundamental property of the universe, like the expansion of space or the decay of stars. A recurring, galactic-scale event that scours this galaxy of complex life. Lyra felt a coldness spread through her form that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. She had heard myths, of course. Every civilization had them. Stories of the gods who came before, of ages of light followed by ages of darkness. The progenitors themselves were part of such a myth. They had appeared, seeded the consortium with their knowledge, and then vanished as mysteriously as they had arrived. The signal suggests that civilizations rise, reach a certain level of technological and social complexity, and then they encounter the silence, Rostova continued. We do not know its nature, a wave of exotic radiation, a phase shift in physical law, a self-propagating mimetic virus that erases consciousness. The message is unclear. All it says is that when the silence passes, the galaxy is once again quiet, ready for life to begin anew. She looked from Lyra to Vorlag, her gaze piercing, heavy with implication. We believe your progenitors were not gods. We believe they were the survivors of a previous cycle, a civilization that saw the silence coming and in a desperate act left behind the seeds of their knowledge, your technology, in the hopes that the next cycle of life would have a chance to advance more quickly. But something was lost in the transmission. They gave you the tools, but not the understanding, not the warnings. The pieces clicked into place in Lyra's mind with the force of a physical blow. The consortium's stagnation, their inability to innovate beyond the progenitors' gifts. Their long, slow decline from a vibrant, expanding power into galactic curators, endlessly polishing the relics of a forgotten age. They were not the pinnacle of evolution. They were the fading echo of a civilization that had been annihilated. They had been living in a museum for 10,000 years, completely unaware that the building itself was scheduled for demolition. The pattern has repeated itself countless times, Rostova said, her voice now barely a whisper. Civilizations rise, they flourish, and they vanish. The galaxy is filled with the ruins and artifacts of these lost empires. We believe humanity is different for one reason, and one reason only. We evolved on a chaotic, violent world that forced us to constantly adapt, to innovate or die. We never had the luxury of a long, peaceful stagnation. Our entire history has been a frantic race against extinction. And so, when we found this signal, we did not dismiss it as myth. We recognized it for what it was, the next finish line. The Ark fleet now seemed like something different. Not a symbol of humanity's power, but a monument to its existential terror. It was the most audacious, most desperate gamble in the history of the known universe, undertaken by a species that had looked into the great, silent abyss and refused to blink. The energy signature of your dissuasion volley contained more than just the principles of gravitic engineering, Rostova revealed, delivering the final, crushing blow to the consortium's pride. It contained chronoton particles, temporal echoes that are a unique byproduct of your progenitor drives. By analyzing their decay, we were able to calculate the approximate age of your technology. And by comparing that to the cyclical timeline embedded in the ancient signal, we were able to create a forecast. She looked at them, and the empathy in her eyes was now clear and devastating. The next great silence is coming, High Counselor, she said. Not in 1,000,000 years or 1,000. It is coming soon, within our lifetimes. The silence that followed was more profound than any the High Conclave had ever known. It was the silence of a truth so vast it dwarfed empires. The squabble over a border incursion, the fear of a new rival, the pride of an ancient lineage, all of it was rendered utterly, pathetically insignificant. Vorlag slowly, heavily lowered himself into a seat, the articulated joints of his armor groaning in protest. For the first time, Lyra saw the Cathar Lord Marshal not as a warrior, but as an old man confronted with the end of all things. "We show you this," Rostova said, finally answering Vorlag's earlier question, "not to threaten you, but to invite you. This fleet is not just for humanity. We built it to preserve a record of all intelligent life we could find. A library of consciousness to weather the coming storm and when it has passed, to seed the galaxy anew. We built these arcs to save everyone." Her words hung in the air, a proposal so radical, so profoundly ethical, that it defied every political and military doctrine the consortium had ever conceived. These humans, these soft-bodied, ephemeral creatures from a chaotic world, had suffered an act of aggression from them, and their response was not to seek revenge, but to offer salvation, to offer a seat on the lifeboat. "We believe," Ambassador Rostova concluded, her calm voice the only anchor in a swirling vortex of cosmic dread, "that the universe is a dark and terrifying place. But the one thing we have learned throughout our short and violent history is that the darkness is always less terrifying when you do not have to face it alone." Lyra looked at the view screen, at the silent, majestic fleet of worlds that humanity had built. It was a testament not to their power, but to their character. In the face of ultimate annihilation, they had not despaired. They had not grown selfish. They had built. They had planned. And they had prepared to hold the door open for a stranger, even a stranger who had shot at them first. She turned her gaze to Vorlag, whose own multifaceted eyes were fixed on the human ambassador. The animosity, the suspicion, the millennia of ingrained Cathar pride, it had all been burned away, leaving behind only a raw, humbling awe. He had met his honor's greatest challenge not on a field of battle, but in a quiet room at the words of a creature he had dismissed as a primitive. In that moment, the Xylos consortium ceased to be an empire. It became, instead, a candida. T for survival. Lyra knew what her decision must be. The old ways were dead, artifacts of an age of ignorance that was rapidly drawing to a close. The future was not in maintaining the past, but in forging a new path into the oncoming darkness, side by side with the most unlikely of allies. She inclined her crystalline form, a gesture of profound respect that had not been offered to another species in 1,000 years. "Ambassador Rostova," she projected, her voice clear and steady, filled with a purpose she had not felt in centuries. "Tell us what you need." Outside, in the silent, indifferent void, the human arcs held their position, their gentle lights like a string of new stars. They were a fleet built from a wound, a new hope forged in the crucible of an accidental conflict. And they waited patiently for the rest of the galaxy to realize that the old quarrels were over, and the true, final war, the war against the encroaching, absolute silence, was about to begin.